Welcome to the On the Rise podcast, where we talk about time freedom, passive investing through real estate, finance, mindset, and how to integrate your faith into your work. Let's dive in. Quick disclaimer as always, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I'm not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. Welcome to the On the Rise podcast. My name is Nick Stromwall, your host. This is the new Faith-Driven Leader series where we're helping leaders learn how to navigate incorporating their faith into their work. I'm excited to introduce my guest, Paul Poteat. He was my friend, mentor, boss, confidant, that person I would call when I was navigating a tough decision. He is the Midwest Network Director for Campus Outreach Serve. Campus Outreach was a ministry that I worked for 15 years. He's married to Sam. He's got 2 daughters, recently relocated to Cincinnati, was in Minneapolis for a lot of years, and now leads several different, I think maybe 8 or 9 different campus outreach regions. So Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm excited to be here. Like you said, I feel like we knew each other and lived around each other and worked together for so long. And it's kind of wild to think about connecting again in a different context after so many years of side by side working together and laboring together.
Yeah, and just for context for the listeners, you guys probably have a mentor, an older person in your life where you're constantly trying to become more like them. Maybe you've had a boss in your life where your boss has made you feel like you have wings and you can fly. And maybe you've had tough decisions in your life where you didn't know who to call, but you probably had that one friend, that one boss, that one mentor, that one person that wasn't afraid to tell you the hard truth. Paul has been that friend for me in a lot of years. Paul's also a very gifted entrepreneur, not only helping lead a ministry, but also has experience in owning real estate and thinking through the lens of how do you incorporate your faith into your everyday work. And more than that, casting vision for countless staff members with this campus ministry and students to live a life on purpose. So this is going to be a really exciting episode because I think one of your spiritual gifts, Paul, I don't know if this just showed up on your test, is wisdom. But when you think of wisdom, what comes to your mind?
I think a lot of times when we face life's challenges, we're looking for clear advice on what is the right and the wrong way to go about doing something. I work for ministry, and so, we're constantly engaging with the truth that comes out of the Bible. And I think sometimes people want to treat the Bible like a black and white, right and wrong way to get advice or direction. But I think wisdom is that space where you don't know exactly what is right or what is wrong. It's a little bit more gray. And then you've got to be able to navigate life when it's not absolutely clear if you should do this, or if, should you get a credit card and start making lots of payments, when you're in high school. I think most people would say you probably shouldn't, but it's not exactly black or white, right? Like, you might have your child and you want to help them develop their credit, and so you're going to get them a credit card and walk with them. I think that's where wisdom comes in, because it's having to navigate not just is something right or wrong in a given instance, but what are all of the other factors and their circumstances in their life, their upbringing, their accountability, their coaching, that kind of all go together to help someone navigate the way that I think most of us engage the majority of our lives, which is there's not a clear, exact, specific answer. There's a lot of different possibilities and a lot of different options, and wisdom is what helps us navigate the some of the unknowns of life.
Also, someone's listening to this and they have a big decision to make. Should I pursue this business opportunity or this business opportunity? Coach that person through making a decision using wisdom.
Yeah. So that's a great example because what people want is yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. But I don't know that anyone can clearly give them that answer. Maybe they could as they learn, some of the different, factors. So one, if they're thinking about pursuing this or not pursuing it, well, uh, what do people around you like if they were asking me and I didn't know them, there's only so much of their life and their circumstances that I understand, but I would be really curious, what do other people close to them think and what would they say, which just begs the discussion, like, you need to have people in your life who see your life, who understand your life, and who understand your circumstances. If this person is thinking about making a decision, to pursue a business, and they've just moved and they've just had a child and their parents are health is not, going well, those factors really matter in whether or not they should do it. And a lot of times people aren't going to be able to know that unless they're living around them. And so you need to ask, what do these other people say? um, I think, if everything else was a given, what do you want to do? I think that the Lord has made a world and put us in it where we have desires. And I think about even our time working together, Nick. Like, so often you would have all kinds of desires or interests that really got you excited, and and then there were other ones that were clear to you, like, no, nothing in me would want to do that. And I think that matters, because if you really want to pursue this, and the people around you who know you well say, man, I think that's a good thing for you, like I could see you doing really well in that, then that matters. And then you kind of look to, does this seem right or reasonable or just or fair? So you're kind of taking what you want and what other people would say, and then you're kind of weighing in some truth. Maybe that comes from your faith. Maybe that comes from your relationship with God. It comes from, there's some businesses that are clearly along the lines of what maybe someone would think are good or right or prudent or financially sound. And then there's other ones where it's like, I don't, you might really like that and people think that's a good idea, but I just don't know that there's any way that's going to make money or be wise for you. Well, that it doesn't really matter what people say or what you think. What's true is this is not, it's probably not good to open a video rental store right now. As much as you might want to do that, and people think, oh, that'll be so cool. Like, don't retro arcades, one thing, block, rejuvenating blockbuster video, maybe not the best thing. So is it right and feasible? Do I want to do it? What do the people who know me well say? I think that's a good grid to kind of run any decision through.
And was that a grid or was that a shape? I couldn't tell there by your
Uh,
your
well,
language.
well, it's a triangle, and I like triangles because it makes things a little bit more simplified. But I think those three points on the triangle you can run through. You know, uh, Even you take something regarding your faith, like what does the Bible say? What does your community say? What do you believe? And how those things work out.
So while we're going through this transition, I kind of gave your a little bit of your bio, but I don't think I did it justice. Walk us through what is campus outreach, what is your role, what exactly are you even stepping outside of doing in this moment right now? Why are you traveling? Kind of walk us through a little bit of a day in the life of Paul.
I often tell our staff and other students and just friends of mine, if someone gives you an inch, you take a mile when it comes to answering a question. And I think to really answer that question, I have to kind of go backwards a little bit. And, I grew up in South Carolina, grew up in a very religious household, and would have said at an early age that I believed in God, that I was a Christian. But really it wasn't until I went to college that I think that's where I really understood what it meant to have a relationship with God. And I think a lot of times people can confuse believing in God and going to church and doing religious things with actually that's what the essence of faith is. And I think growing up, that's what I thought it meant is I I go through these motions and I do these things, and that makes me a Christian. But in college, what I really learned is no, there's a way that you have a relationship with God that's really unique in that respect. And I just think in the United States, maybe not as much now as when I was growing up, but in general, we live in a country that has Christian faith roots, and it's easy for people to kind of check that box without really knowing the the true essence of having a relationship with God that was made available by understanding what Jesus has done for us. And so I went to college not understanding that. I thought what I need to do is be really good and do the right things. And if I do that, God's going to be pleased with me. And so what God really wants is perfection or goodness from Paul. But I think what the essence of Christianity is that God wants me to understand that I'm not good and that I can't do anything to ultimately earn his favor, but that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for me, that I could have a relationship with him. So I went to college thinking I was going to be a doctor, and then got, my world turned upside down with that good news, not good advice, but good news. And that just kind of set my life on a trajectory of I want the students around me, I want my friends to understand what I've begun to see is that there's a world of life and purpose and forgiveness and opportunity as you have a relationship with God. And that happened through the ministry of campus outreach. There's not anything magical about campus outreach as opposed to any other campus ministry. The real true distinctive of campus outreach is that we try to partner with local churches to do college ministry. So there's some ministries that they maybe go to church, but they don't work directly with those churches. So I came on staff with Campus Outreach for 3 years in South Carolina, then moved up to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to start the ministry there. And that's actually where, Nick, you and I met, because you were a freshman at the University of Minnesota and we're playing Ultimate Frisbee in the middle of the main lawn late at night, which, at that point I was like, any student who's just out hanging out, that's what I'm going to do. So, I did that in Minnesota for 19 years and kind of worked at just the University of Minnesota and then at another campus, and then kind of took over the leadership of that region. And then 4.5 years ago, was asked to consider a role within campus outreach that's not directly ministering to students, but is doing staff development. So doing assessments for staff, doing trainings for staff, helping work with those church partnerships. But in order for me to do that in the best way, I needed to relocate. So our family moved from Minneapolis to kind of a central location in the Midwest, and that was Cincinnati, Ohio. So I've been in Cincinnati since the summer of 2022. And so really in about 3 weeks, we will celebrate 4 years in Cincinnati. And in that time, my job has been a lot more regionally focused. So I travel to help with ministries in Kentucky, in Ohio, obviously, Indianapolis, Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota. And there's probably 180 staff on around 25 campuses. And that's working primarily with 3 larger churches. And there's 3 other guys that do my job in the United States. And all together, we kind of help oversee or consult the stateside ministry for campus outreach.
That's amazing. You shared a lot there. I'd love to double click on a couple of those things. Firstly, when you go to college, that kind of sets the trajectory of a direction that you're going to go. And a lot of times people come in thinking one direction and they take a class, they meet someone, they have an opportunity, and that totally pivots. What was that like for you going in thinking, pre-med doctor, but then kind of having a shift? How did you navigate that decision?
Yeah, at the time, I don't know that I navigated it with very much thought, other than kind of going back to what I shared earlier. I mean, my life and my desires just were radically changing. I think I wanted to be a doctor primarily because it was very secure, it was prestigious. In high school, I was voted most likely to succeed. Being a doctor seems like it checks that box, so I should do it. But it was less. I mean, I would have said, yeah, I want to help people, and I think a lot of times that's a part of it. But under the surface was, man, I want the acclaim and the respect and everything that comes with being a medical professional. But then when my life changed and I began to experience what it meant to have a relationship with Christ, what I wanted started changing. And so I just wanted other people to experience what I had experienced. Um, and so that was a big factor. And then as I would talk with people about, hey, I'm thinking about going on staff with this ministry as opposed to going to medical school, what do you think? And a lot of the people that I talked to, people my age, people younger than me, people older than me, they would say, I think you do really well at that. Like, that makes a lot of sense. I could see you doing that. And and then, remember my triangle: my desires, check; other people's affirmation, check. And then, have I been successful in this? Like, have I connected with people? Have I seen the Lord work? Is this something that um, I I think makes sense for a need in this world, and something that is near to the heart of God? I felt like, yes, it does. And so now, at the time, I was not thinking through that triangle at all. But in hindsight, those were just kind of the natural things that I was doing, because I think we all kind of naturally make our decisions in that way. We evaluate our own desires and we engage with the people around us, and we have a source of truth or some principles, um, a means of getting direction that we go to help us navigate whatever decision that we make. But so much for me was, man, the Lord's done a lot in my life, and this is pretty radical. And then as I'm engaging with other people, their lives are being changed, and it was hard for me to deny. I think the Lord might want me to do this and not be a doctor. And again, like I said, my desires for what I did were changing. So all that was kind of coalescing together at the same time.
Yeah, wow, that's great. If you were a business, what you're describing there with that triangle would be an excellent lead magnet, where you present that as a free giveaway in exchange for giving someone their name and phone number. So you should think about that, Paul. Or maybe you already have something like that.
I just give anyone whatever I can, and the more diagrams that I can come up with, the better, because people remember it a little bit more. And I think in teaching in general, and I've experienced through the avenue of campus ministry, when you can take information or a couple of thoughts and group it together or make a diagram, people just it forms an image, and words are helpful. But when you can see those words drawn out, it's a little bit more helpful. And then when it resonates with your own experience, then you've got a winner. So
How many years has it been working with campus outreach now?
yeah,
26.
this fall will begin my 27th year of doing college ministry, which in the college ministry world is pretty rare air. Um, A lot of people maybe will, it's kind of like in the pastoral world, people maybe start as youth ministers and they do that and then they kind of age out and they become associate pastors and they become senior pastors. In the college ministry world, you kind of become a director of a ministry, but then after a while you maybe get asked to be a pastor at a church or to think about working in business leadership or consulting or something like that. And so there are not a lot of other people, and I'm just speaking for our organization, but there aren't a lot of people who have close to 30 years, you know. So
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So how do you do it for that long? Like, what keeps you going in the same direction? I think a lot of people are kind of trained. In college, my mentor, Gordon, he said, Nick, he even drew it out a little piece of paper. He said, Nick, you work for someone as long as you can get value out of it, and when you reach a tipping point, you're going to start to peak this way. That's when you start looking for another job that might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, and then you go to the next place and you do the same thing. You milk them for all they're worth, and then when you start feeling like you're on the decline, no more upward momentum, then you go to the next place, which kind of feels a little bit. You kind of just use a company, use a job, use a place for your own gain. How do you stay excited about doing campus ministry for 27 years?
yeah, that's a good question. You know, I, it's it's a lot of fun to think about in that context because there's a number of books and resources that sometimes we can look at in the campus ministry world that were never made for campus ministry. They were made primarily for a business model. So maybe that's I read Good to Great, or a number of Patrick Lencioni books, or Traction, or things like that. And when you move those into the nonprofit world, and especially ministry with students, it's like, yeah, there's some things that hold true, but others that don't. Um, and as you were describing that, and like you you stay with an organization as long as it's kind of working, and then you go to the next one. Um, I think in ministry, it, it's hard to have a definable outcome. Whereas if I worked as a business executive or owned a company, then oftentimes kind of your bottom line profit, maybe that's the tangible outcome. Maybe you're not looking to make money, but it's how many people you service or you help. That's how you determine it. But in ministry, I can go days or weeks or months and have all kinds of conversations and not even know, like, is this changing anything? Is this doing anything? And I think what's helped me stay in this for a long time is so much of what I do is not about my output, but about my own personal growth and development and my own relationship to the Lord. So my sense of purpose is not how many staff do we have, how many students made a profession of faith, how many people want to come on staff, how big was our conference. I think earlier on, those metrics really uh, inspired me or motivated me. And I think there would come a point where if that's what you were driving at, it left you a little bit unfulfilled or unsatisfied. It would make me maybe look for something else. But I think the way that I've thought about it as I've grown up more is it's not just about the output, but it's about who I'm becoming, the challenges that I face. Maybe not quantity as much as quality. And I feel like I've grown so much as an individual and as a leader as I've stayed in one place. Because there's something about at that moment of, call it boredom, or call it uh, like not feeling challenged, that in our day and age, a lot of people do leave and go on to the next thing. But there's something that grows, that only grows in the perseverance, in the resilience of staying there, even if it doesn't feel as fulfilling, even if it doesn't feel like you wanted it to, even though there's a better option out there. There's something about the commitment, and it begins to change you in a deeper way. And I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I looked at my future and thought, do I want to do campus ministry or do I want to do something else? And as I've stayed with it for these 5 years, I've only become more convinced that this is what I want to do. So now I think there may be people listening who feel like they're at a place and they've, I forget how you said it, gotten all that they can out of that job or that role or that situation. And maybe, yes, maybe they do need to go do something else. But I wonder, are there people in those situations that if they just stuck around for 3 or 4 more years and they leaned into that season, who they might become as an individual and as a leader, and what kind of impact that might have, right? Um, I can think about it with like coaching, because it seems like they talk about the coaching carousel, and like if a coach had a successful season as a high school coach, then maybe he could go coach college, and if a college had a successful season, then maybe he goes to the pros or something like that. But what if that high school coach just decided, yeah, we had a successful season, I'm going to stay here. Yeah, I could get more money, I could get more out of it, I could go to the next challenge, but I want to build something locally. I want to build something that it takes decades to build. And when I look at the work that I've been able to do in campus ministry over almost 30 years, I can look and see where our ministry was and where I was 30 years ago, and when we have a long way to go. But I can see the progress that we've made. And if people didn't stick around for a long time, we're never going to make some of those turns. And it takes leaning into the hard, leaning into the mundane, maybe sacrificing opportunity because there's something better to be found.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
Yeah, I think it's there's a difference between faithfulness and fruitfulness. A lot of times they go hand in hand, but in some roles there's not a bottom line revenue number necessarily. You invest this much in an opportunity and you get this much out of it, right? We talk a lot about that in investing. I'm going to make $100,000 investment and I'm going to give you back an X return. When it comes to developing people, which you're caring for almost 200 people, you and Sam, which that's an incredible amount of people to care for with just 2 people. And obviously there's leaders at all those different levels that you're pouring into. But how do you yourself shepherd leaders without burning out or spreading yourself too thin? What does that look like in your life? And have you ever had a season where that got out of whack, where you weren't caring for yourself?
It might sound like a broken record, but one of the biggest things that's helped is having other people in our lives that know us really well. Because if you live an isolated, kind of individualized life, then you're the only person that knows how you're doing. And you might think you're doing well, you might think you're healthy, you might think you're making all the right decisions, but the reality is that if someone else saw your life, if someone else knew what was going on, they would strongly disagree. And so I feel like we've always, my wife and I, in our ministry experience, have always really prioritized having other people know how we spend our time. Nowadays, how often we travel. Do we travel together? Is one of us at home while the other one travels? Are we taking time on the weekends? I think work in our current day and age, it's so easy to take it home with you and to be accessible all the time, and technology makes that a reality. The fact that we're able to have this conversation for better or for worse, in a car, driving is both a beautiful thing, but it also means that I didn't have to be at home all day. I could be on the go, and that factors in. And so I think that's made us have to really say, how are we using our weekends? And are we taking our work home on Saturday and Sunday? Or are we carving out some time to be around our family, or just to personally be recharged and rejuvenated? Um, because, there's a beauty in a 9 to 5, is that it starts at 9 and it ends at 5. And then there's a beauty in, kind of what we do, which I could have a phone call with someone on the other side of the world at 5 a.m., and I could stay up with college students until after midnight, and there's no real boundaries. And that gives all kinds of possibilities, but it also means there needs to be limitations. And so I think having people who know our lives and will ask us hard questions and will press in has been a big deal. And I think, you know, really prioritizing a time each week that Sam and I sit down and talk about our schedule. And if we can't do it that week, then we'll do it the next week, doing that over a quarter, doing that for our semester, doing that for the year, and making sure in those times, like, we're going to have this weekend off. We're going to have these family nights each week, and not flexing on those. And if something comes up, we absolutely have to change it, then we'll compensate. Friday night tends to be our pizza and movie night as a family, or we'll play a family game or something like that. And if we have to travel on that Friday, then we're going to make sure that on Thursday night we do that, or we get back on Saturday, and Saturday night we're going to do that. And I think knowing your margins, knowing your limitations, having other people that speak into your life, those have been some big ones for us that have helped, I think, set some of those boundaries, and making sure that it's not just we are setting boundaries, but we're getting other people outside of ourselves to help set those boundaries.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, we have a Stromwall tradition: pizza, movie, and smoothie for Friday nights as well. It's a great tradition. We're getting into our own, baking our own bread and trying to customize pizza oven type of flavor. So that's awesome. We've got about 20 minutes left, Paul. I want to talk about two things, and we might have to do a follow-up meeting because we're not going to get to all of the questions I have for you. You're a very interesting mix of multiple talents, not only leading, caring for large teams, developing people, premarital education, teaching, but you're also an entrepreneur. Could you walk us through maybe some of those entrepreneurial ventures that you've done? Some have coined the phrase, not only is Paul on staff with a ministry, but he's also, a real estate investor or a real estate mogul. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't set out to do that. I really wanted to be a campus minister and do whatever it took to have the ability to connect with students and do life alongside of them and other people on our staff team. And when we moved to Minnesota, my first years on staff were in a very small town, Clinton, South Carolina, at Presbyterian College. There were 1,200 students. There were 2 red lights in the town. I don't know what the population of the town was, maybe 8,000, 10,000 people. And then I moved to the University of Minnesota, which is 55,000 students. So 5 times as big as the town I was living in, not to mention surrounded by the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro. And what I quickly learned is that the work that I wanted to do with talking to students about their relationship with God, having evangelistic conversations, it felt like, if I'm doing that, how am I also helping Christians be connected to each other? And those things seem to be opposed to each other. Because if you're if you're just hanging out with other Christians, then what about the people that don't have faith, that would love to know about what a relationship with God was like? But these Christians are hanging out all the time, so it felt like you have to pick and choose, unless you could get some property nearby the campus that students and staff could live in together, and then you could bring the students that you met to that property. And so, when we moved up there, several of us went in together to purchase a triplex from an individual. And, that allowed the women on our staff team to live on one floor, the men to live on another floor, and then to have a floor for students or other people that we met. And then as staff like myself got married, then that opened up more space for living in that triplex. But the guy who owned that triplex owned one right beside it, and then another one right beside that, and liked us and our ministry so much that whenever it came time for him to try to sell one of those properties, he would ask us if we were interested. All of this was prior to 2008. And so the ability to get a mortgage or a second mortgage, or to get into an expensive property with zero money down, was a lot easier. and so unknowingly, we took advantage of those realities and were able to acquire a couple of properties that had, two mortgages on them. And, we for so long saw absolutely no kind of return on that investment. Didn't even see it as an investment. Just saw it as, hey, here's how we get some houses that students could live in and be around each other. But then over time, as one of those mortgages gets paid off, and now instead of having two mortgages on a house, you only have one. Well, there's all this, this money that was going into the mortgage that now you have that can be put into another property, because as the ministry grew, there were more students. So again, I never thought like I want to be a real estate investment entrepreneur. I thought I want to create space for students to live and to interact with each other, and for all of that to go together. And then along the way, as I paused and reflected, I thought, actually, this is a good investment. And in ministry like ours, and in a lot of campus ministry, the people who work for those ministries need to raise funds at some level, and that can be challenging. And especially if you want to live in a downtown metro area near a college campus, and if you want to purchase a home and build equity, that becomes almost infeasible because of the financial burden. But if you're able to acquire a rental property, it actually opens some doors for that. And so as I experienced that, I would talk about that with other people. You were one of those people, of just the opportunity to be creative and to think about how can you combine the ministry that you're doing with the potential to acquire a property that actually, we're able to rent to students for cheaper than they would be able to pay elsewhere. We're able to take care of it in ways better than maybe other houses and landlords would take care of it. We're able to cultivate some community that other places don't have. And, right at the cusp of, the introduction of the iPhone and technology, when society started becoming a little bit more isolated and splintered, here we are providing, life on life opportunities for housing and living that just kind of steamrolled or snowballed into a few other properties. And so as anyone who's thinking about investment properties or has some knows, that the first one is really tough, because you don't see, you want to invest in something and see immediate returns, and we didn't see returns for a number of years. But then when you begin to see those returns, if you can take that and use that to reinvest into other properties, then you can start building some momentum. But it takes time, it takes patience. I feel like my 20s, I hustled a lot. In my 30s is where I just kind of maintained all of these different opportunities for investment properties. And then in my 40s is where it's felt like a little bit more like I can't hustle quite like that. Both my life stage and my children's life stage and moving but that makes me glad that in my 20s and 30s I did, and that meant that we had to sacrifice as a family in some ways in our finances, and um, not do some of the things that maybe we wanted to do or that our peers were able to do. But like any investment, you've got to be patient in what could happen in 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road, not just the short-term gains that you really want to see. And I just feel like, again, we kind of stumbled into an opportunity where the work that we were doing on the campus combined with the need for student housing, and those two things just fit together seamlessly.
Yeah, sounds like the why of providing a context for community for the students you wanted to mentor and disciple created the context for this opportunity. And to get in at that time of the market, it was a great time to get in the market. And now it's didn't produce a lot of fruit right away, but over time, that's a long-term investment. So that's really cool. We could speak a lot about investing. I think you have a lot of really good experience there. I think one topic I continue to hear about with leaders that I'm around is just this topic of anxiety. Either they themselves walking through it, they're grinding in those grinding years of building a business. Their kids are walking through challenges with the normal things kids go through at school. People are just experiencing maybe an up and down in their own portfolio or investing, and that does produce some anxiety. How do you help someone walk through that? What does that look like, both maybe from a personal experience in your own life and then also with some of these people that you're mentoring?
Yeah, man, the last 4 years I feel like have been a masterclass on that in my life. Um, and I would go so far as to say, if someone has not walked through engaging their own anxiety and fears and concerns in a significant way, I don't know how much they could offer other people. And I say that because I feel like the last 4 or 5 years of my life have been some of the hardest and some of the most challenging, most anxiety producing. And on the front end of that, of those circumstances, it's the last thing I would have ever wanted. But now I can look back on challenging situations in ministry, challenging situations in family, challenging situations in the church, challenging situations with investment properties, and I wouldn't change it because again, it comes back to what's helped me stay on staff for as long as I have. I've just seen the way that the Lord has used those experiences to shape me and change me. And I think when it comes to feeling anxious about things, uh, there's a there's a book that I like by an author named Steve Cuss. That book is called Managing Leadership Anxiety. Um, and through trying to get him to come speak to do some training for our staff, I got introduced to his broader ministry, which is called Capable Life, and had a guy from that ministry come in and do some training. And I've read other books kind of along the lines of managing leadership anxiety. There's one called A Failure of Nerve. There's one called The Leader's Journey. There's one called Everything Isn't Terrible. And it's all kind of out of a way of thinking about anxiety. And here's some of the core things that I just feel like they've been really beneficial for me. Is the first thing you've got to do is learn to notice your anxiety. And so how does it show up in you? If you start to raise your voice at a coworker, at one of your children, or at a friend, you're probably reacting in that moment. If you're trying to avoid something or someone, you don't want to have a conversation. That very well could be because you're anxious. You're being reactive, and I think what we have, like 80%, is just noticing. Wow, when I saw that person's name come up on my phone, calling me, I felt something in my stomach, like my shoulders tightened. I didn't want to have the conversation. All right, you're noticing, you're becoming aware, like there's something going on. And, like you said, a lot of people feel anxious. So, there might be people who say, oh, I notice, I know it's going on. Well, then you've got to name it. You've got to say, all right, what is it that I want right now? Do I want control and I feel out of control? Do I feel like I need to have all the right answers? Um, you know, do I want everyone to be happy with me? Um, am I afraid of failure? What is it that in a more specific way that's causing the anxiety that I feel? And so you notice it and then you name it. And then once you name it, then you can start trying to diffuse it, to trying to engage it. Again, like I said, broken record. I think that comes by letting other people know, hey, I felt anxious about this. Can you pray for me? Can you give me some advice? Can you help me here? Um, it's sometimes just noticing and naming actually starts the process of diffusing it. Um, there's things that I've learned in my life. It's good for me to go for a run or to exercise or to play the piano or to play the guitar, because when I do those things, it just kind of takes the focus off of whatever it is that I think that I want. Because that kind of anxiety, like there's anxiety that's the kind that's diagnosed. So, some people legitimately have an anxiety struggle or an anxiety disorder or a clinical diagnosis. That's not what I'm talking about. There's another kind of anxiety that has been wired into us that's good for us to have. The other day, I was driving in Cincinnati. It's like in some mountains, and I was on a road, and there were lots of hills and curves. And I kid you not, a car was coming. I think the guy was texting, and he was halfway in my lane, and it was the only thing I could do is either slam on my brakes or swerve off the road. And so I just laid on my horn and slammed on my brakes. And he looked up and he swerved out of the way. And literally, it was 4 or 5 seconds from having the worst crash I could have ever had in my life. And after that moment, my heart was racing. Like, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. We've all had that feeling. But what happens in about 30 minutes? It kind of goes away. I was driving to meet with a friend and play 9 holes of golf. And by the time I was out on the golf course playing with this guy, I had totally forgotten about it. I don't think I even told my family that I came this close to the worst accident of my life, because it went away. I'm not talking about that kind of anxiety. That's good anxiety. We're supposed to have these responses in a moment. What you and I think, are talking about is your mind is telling you that you need something that you really don't need. You think you need control. You think you need approval. You think you need to avoid this person, when the reality is that you need to be reminded of some truth. You need to lean into it. You need to name it. You need to notice it. And then that starts to diffuse it. There's a passage that I like in the Bible in 1 Peter chapter 3, I think it's verse 7. And it says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, casting your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And I think what that verse is saying is that, okay, you're not in control. You need to humble yourselves. God is the one who's mighty. Okay, how do you humble yourself? By casting your anxieties on him. Why do you do that? Because he cares for you. So I think if you're not casting your anxieties on him, if you're not praying, if you're not asking for help, you're actually not humbling yourself. You're actually the opposite. You're actually being prideful. You're actually trying to be God and realize, hey, this is out of your control. Maybe the last thing I would say on the whole topic of anxiety is, oftentimes we think that if someone else would just change and do things the way that we want, that would really help our anxiety. You're in a conflict with your spouse, your kids are misbehaving, someone at work is challenging. If they would just do this, then everything would be better. And I don't think that's the way that we're supposed to deal with our anxiety. We've got to ask the question, what's going on in me? What do I need to change? How do I need to show up differently in this situation? Because if you start to change, it tends to be that the people that you're interacting with around you, be that your spouse, be that your kids, be that someone at work, they'll start to change too. Anxiety is really contagious, but calm is also contagious. And I've just wanted to fight in my life to, if I can feel my anxiety starting to rise up, notice it, name it. Okay, what am I being anxious about? All right, I'm going to cast my anxieties on the Lord. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to try to engage. I'm going to talk to someone, ask them for prayer, ask them for help, and then I'm going to step into the situation. Because oftentimes, if we start to feel the anxiety, that means our response is we need to avoid this. But I actually think sometimes what we need to do is we actually need to lean into it a little bit and trust God that it might be out of our control, but that He's actually trying to do something in us. And the anxiety is the light on the dashboard of your car that's actually pointing to maybe something deeper that's kind of driving the anxiety. Again, that might be control or approval or perfectionism or needing to have the answers or whatever. And the anxiety is the pathway that you can discern that.
Yeah, it's really good. I read this daily devotional, and it describes this image of, think of a stick figure with all of these anxieties, think a knapsack thrown over your shoulder. So it's like your anxiety is in this bag, right? And some people like to set that bag down, maybe in prayer, or they tell God about their anxieties. But I think we also have a tendency of, after we set it down at God's feet, we kind of just pick it right back up again and kind of keep bearing that. How does one, I guess, set it down and, we use the phrase give it to God or hand it over to Him, or even in prayer, like you have this anxiety, you're bearing it, but then you give it to God? What does that even look like?
Yeah. Um, there's a passage uh, in Isaiah. I think it's chapter 64, and it's either verse 4 or verse 6. If I was going to put my money on it, I think it's 6. And it says, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no one has perceived a God like you who works for those who wait for Him." And what that verse is saying is that so often that we have a God who wants to work for us. We have a God who is aware of our struggles and our challenges, and He's calling us to wait. And so, to keep your illustration going, if you have this bag on your shoulder of your burdens or your anxieties, and you set it down, um, sometimes there are things that are completely out of your control. A diagram that I make is I'll draw 3 columns, and one is mine at the top, one is theirs, and the other is God's. And as I engage with people, I need to ask, okay, what's my responsibility? And I think, you could take your bag and you need to look through that bag that you're carrying. You need to think, all right, what's my responsibility? Because my guess is people have a bag, and they have in that bag of burden or anxiety things that actually are their responsibility. And I think when you lay that down, you should pick that back up. Um, but there are probably some things in there that aren't your responsibility. It's someone else's. Um, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and there's times when I can tell her to clean her room, or that she should call her friend that she's been trying to get together with. But I'm not going to keep reminding her, because I've told her that's my responsibility. Now her responsibility is to clean her room or to call her friend, and I can leave her with that. And then there's responsibilities in there that are God's, that I can't control. And back to the verse, we have a God who works for those who wait for Him. I think sometimes we need to pray about things and say, God, here's what I'm anxious about. Here's what I'm carrying. Here's what I'm struggling with. Can you take it? Can you do this work? Can you help me see what's mine? What do I need to own? What do I need to trust others to own? What do I need to believe is just yours and that you're going to own? And Sometimes we have to pick the bag up and carry things that are other people's responsibilities for a season, because that's what it looks like to be a parent. That's what it looks like to care for aging parents. That's what it looks like to be a good friend sometimes. But again, remember, back to my whole paradigm, you've got to notice and name. And if you just notice, hey, I'm carrying this, and then you can name, and this is mine, and this is Nick's, and this is God's, then I think you really need to give to the Lord the things that are His responsibility that you can't change. You know, I've worked with students and people, basically coaching, mentoring, trying to help people change. And I can say a lot of things, but I ultimately can't change anyone. Only God is going to convict their hearts and change their lives. And I can say some things, but then there's times when I want to overfunction and do things for them and try to change them myself. And that is definitely not trusting to God what is His. And it's just good for me to kind of parse out what's mine, what's theirs, what's the Lord's. God wants to work for me as I would wait. What does waiting look like? Is that just praying? Is that actually continuing to walk carrying the sack? What does that entail? Um, and so I think I have to, assess that in my own life. I would also say, just to keep your analogy going a little bit, I think sometimes people are walking around, they're carrying this bag, and they may set it down and they may want to pray. They may want to give it to the Lord, and they pick it up and they carry it, but then they want to find someone else and they want to hand it back to them. And I think a lot of times what we might feel like as leaders is that everyone is coming to us with their bags. What we might feel like as parents is, man, everyone wants to hand us this bag of their burdens or their anxieties. And then we take those on and we put those into our bag. And sometimes we go to people with our anxieties, and it helps us to tell someone. It's the reaction, like if someone calls you and tells you, oh, so and so got laid off at their job, or so and so, like your mom or your dad is sick, or your siblings, they're struggling in their marriage, and you want to pick up that phone and call someone real quick and tell them, hey, I just found out so and so's marriage is struggling. Hey, I just found out like so and so got laid off on their job. Sometimes what that is you feel anxious about that whole situation, and what helps you deal with your anxiety is to hand that like hot potato, like past the knapsack, is to hand that to someone else, and all of a sudden you feel better because you've gotten to talk about it and get it off your chest. Sometimes it's good to talk things out with people, but there are also times when people hand us their anxieties or their burdens and we take responsibility when we shouldn't. And there's times that we maybe go to people with responsibilities to give to them that maybe we shouldn't. And as a leader, I think part of what we have to, like the work that we have to do, is to try to discern, again, what's mine, what's theirs, what's God's. Am I trying to get them to do something that's not my responsibility? Am I sharing something with them and basically giving them my anxiety? Am I taking on their anxieties? Um, this happens at work when uh, someone at work tells a coworker that they're frustrated with you as their boss, and that coworker comes to you and says, "Hey Nick, I was talking with someone the other day, and they're kind of frustrated with you." That person didn't know what to do with this other person's frustration and anxiety, and then he brought that to you. And I don't know that that was the best thing, because what you've got to do at that point is not, well, hey, can you tell them to not feel that way? You've got to go and have direct conversation. And I think a lot of times we don't have direct conversation. We go in roundabout ways to make that happen. And I just think that that's a way that we try to deal with our anxieties and our burdens, sometimes in unhealthy ways.
So, a lot of leaders are probably listening to this. They're experiencing maybe some success in work. Maybe they're in a relationship, they're married, they've got kids. How do you protect your integrity when the pressure to compromise is real and the justifications are easy? So, what does that look like in your life and in in the lives of people that you've counseled? And maybe we'll end with this question, Paul.
Yeah. Um, a way that I think about it, and I think this gets a little bit at what you're asking, is um, I think that we have our internal world, our character, our personal integrity, our maturity, let's say. I'm going to refer to that as like your internal world. And then you have your external world, and those are your responsibilities, and those are your opportunities. And I think oftentimes along comes a leader or an entrepreneur or someone with a lot of zest and zeal for a certain job or endeavor or whatever, and their internal world is still small, but they get a bigger external world. And when your external world is incongruent with your internal world, then I think that leads to opportunities to act without integrity, because you've been giving a like it's the it that's why you don't give the first year immature, you know, intern access to a huge spending budget, you know, because or expense account, because if they just have full access and don't have checks and balances, they have this big external world, but internally they don't know. They've not walked through this. They're not really mature. They don't understand finances. Um, we would see this in our ministry because, again, a lot of our staff raise financial support. And if you put someone responsible for inputting the amount of support that some people get and receive, and they're doing it themselves, and they see, wait a second, Nick supports me X amount, but Nick supports Paul 2X. What's going on here? And then they get bitter. I think that their external world, their responsibilities out here were bigger than kind of their character or their maturity. And so I think that just puts it on the leader to always be growing, always be maturing, always be aware of the places where you need to be developed as an individual. Um, Always need accountability. I think one of the clearest, easiest ways to figure that out is like, who are you under authority to? You know, and as a business leader, as an entrepreneur, you don't maybe have anyone that you're accountable to. No one is your boss. No one is your authority. I think that's a dangerous place to be. I think that's why it's good to have like a mentor who you're going to that has some kind of authority, or a board, or some kind of a peer, or a group, because anyone who just has complete autonomy with no checks, no authority, I think when the opportunity arises to compromise ethically, it's going to be a lot easier because no one's going to know, and it's easy to deceive yourself and think, I'm only going to do this one time, and then after this I'm never going to do it again. But then the situation arises again. It's like, all right, after this time it's the last one. But you don't have that authority, you don't have that accountability, you don't have uh, uh, someone pushing you to grow your internal world, and your external world has vastly exceeded that. I think maybe a good illustration, when you think about young professional athletes, like how many of them come out of high school or 1 year of college and then sign this multi-million dollar contract, only then to like 7 years later declare bankruptcy. What happened? I think their external world had so much more capacity than their internal world could manage. And if they just gave someone, that's why you get a financial advisor, right? Because you want to hire someone whose internal world and whose wisdom is going to be a little bit bigger, so they can handle all of this money. um, and so I just think, who's the person that's calling that to check in your life? Who's making sure that your internal world is growing to match your external world? Because like, even in the ministry realm, I think, you know, people over the last decade, there have been a lot of different scandals where a pastor maybe succumbed to some kind of temptation, or had to resign from the ministry because of impropriety. What happened? I think it's always a scandal because it was a celebrity whose external world outgrew his internal world. And I just think that's why, as leaders, we need to continually, constantly, always be fighting, first and foremost, in our own lives to grow and to mature and to really do whatever it takes to fuel that so that our external world matches it.
Yeah, it's really good. And if you were gonna um, add one more layer to the triangle there, internal, external, what would be the third layer there, Paul?
um, the internal world is your maturity. The external world is your responsibility. I think maybe the other piece would just be your accountability or authority. Um, that the because you might pick someone to help you navigate these things, or are you? But is that person? Are they mature? Did they have some authority? Can they speak into your life? Are you going to listen to them? Because a lot of times leaders are really convinced of what they believe. And so someone might say, I think you should do it this way. And they're like, oh, thanks for that. And then they walk away and they don't really do anything because they think they see rightly. That's not someone who's operating under authority. And so maybe it would be internal world, external world, and then some type of authority that's speaking into your life.
Yeah, it's really good. Man, this has been a very good conversation. There's a lot of questions we didn't get to. So if you're open to it, we'd love to have you on, and maybe even could hear from your wife too. It would be really fun. As I'm thinking about, okay, how can we close this episode? We've talked about a lot of things. It feels like the anxiety piece, thinking in triangles, both those really stand out to me. Would you just kind of pray a prayer of blessing for someone who is really fighting to not just think about their faith as Sundays or Wednesday nights if they go to church then, but they really want to honor God with the work that they've been called to, but they're wanting to take some of the first steps to really entrust their business, entrust their workplace over to the Lord. Can you just pray a prayer of blessing to close us out?
Yeah, I'd love to. And maybe on that note, I was reading, I just thought about this today because in my personal Bible reading, I was in First Chronicles, kind of deep into it, like chapter 20, maybe the end of it. Maybe it was chapter 28 or 29. And there was a verse about people giving in a very generous way to the Lord and to what King David was looking to accomplish. And then it talks about how the Lord took that and used it and blessed that. And I thought about it because I knew we were going to talk, and I knew that one of your values is like you want to have a successful business, but you want that to lead to generosity. And part of that is entrusting a lot of things to the Lord. And so I think that kind of ties directly into, how I want to pray. But I just thought about that this morning. Of all the days to read a verse about generously giving to the Lord and trusting Him with your wealth, happens to be the day that I'm talking to Nick about some of these things. So I just believe we live in a world with no coincidences. And so in that spirit, let me pray. Lord, there are no coincidences. And whoever might be listening to this podcast and considering these things, I just pray that you would use something to meet them and to help them, to invite them into trusting you. It's so easy in a world where we want to be successful and we want to increase the fruitfulness of our investments and of our time and our work, to hold tightly to that. And oftentimes, God, to open our hand and to trust you and to trust others, that in itself could produce a lot of anxiety. And so I just pray, Lord, that you would connect people that listen in and that Nick's connected to with other like-minded people who would be able to remind them of these types of things and would be able to speak into their lives. But more importantly, God, I think back to the verse in 1 Peter that they would humble themselves and cast their anxieties on you, believing that you care for them. Lord, in our culture today, it's so typical to paint a picture of a God who doesn't care and who's distant. But Lord, you created a world that you didn't need to, and you overflowed with grace and abundance, and you sent your son to die on our behalf so that there's nothing that we have to do, nothing that we have to earn to have a right relationship with you. We just need to come to you and trust you. And God, maybe that is with our lives, maybe that's with our businesses, maybe that's with our families, maybe that's with a particular anxiety, a decision, a coworker. God, I pray that you would give people the strength and the faith to do that, and to come to you, and then to come to others, and to be open-handed, to surrender to ultimate authority, but then to the authority and the advice of the people that you place around them. God, the people who are engaged in this podcast and in this realm, you've gifted them in so many ways. And Lord, would they be generous stewards of that grace and of those gifts, and really believe that you've woven into the fabric of the universe just joy that comes not through having more or taking more, but on giving and loving and serving. And so we want to be the type of men, the type of people who do that. And we know that's true because the ultimate picture of all of that is Jesus, who came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life for us. And that's the kind of God that we want to know and love and serve, and steward the good things that you give. And so help people in their anxieties to trust you because of who you are and all that you've done, and to cast their burdens on you, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amazing. Paul, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably maybe it's old school, but if they email me, texts, things get buried. But I tend to use my email as a little bit of a to-do list. And it's just paul@campusoutreach.org. So that would come to me. They should say, hey, I listened to Nick's podcast and wanted to ask this question, and I would love to engage or talk to anyone about anything.
Well, thanks for the time. It's great to catch up with you, and look forward to our next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the On the Rise podcast. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decisions, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the On the Rise podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.